May is Skin Cancer Awareness Month. Welcome to the Ageless Runner. I'm Ralph. So the Skin Cancer Foundation estimates that 1 in 5 Americans will develop skin cancer by the age of 70. I'm a skin cancer survivor. I had melanoma 2 years ago, found very early, so everything's okay, no issues since then. But I thought I would share some information with you today that I've learned over the past couple of years to help you in protecting yourself as you go running this summer. UV indexes are much higher in the summertime, at least here in the northern hemisphere. The Earth's a little closer to the sun the way it tilts, so you're going to have UV indexes up 8, 9, 10, and much more potential damaging to your skin. Now, a good reference for many of these things I'm going to talk about is the Skin Cancer Foundation I mentioned earlier, and that's at skincancer.org. I'll put a link down below, but they're a good site for all things skin cancer and protecting yourselves from that nasty disease. So we're going to talk about several areas. We're going to talk about clothing, we're going to talk about sunscreens, we're going to talk about our lips and our eyes. So let's start with clothing. If you've noticed, a lot of clothing now has something called UPF rating. UPF is ultraviolet protection factor, and that's kind of a number that defines and helps relate how much UV rays can pass through that clothing. Higher is better. In other words, the higher the UPF rating, the less UVA and UVB rays will pass through the clothes. So the way it works is 1 over the UPF rating is percentage of UV rays that will pass through the clothes. For example, let's say you have an article of clothing that has a UPF rating of 30. That means 1/30 or 3.3% of the UV rays will pass through that cloth. So another way, that particular article of clothing will block 96.7% of the UV rays. Maybe you got another piece of clothing with a UPF of 50. 1/50 is 2%. So 2% of the UV rays would pass through that clothing, so it would block 98%. So typically you'd want to shoot for a UPF rating in your clothes of at least 50. You won't find ratings higher than 50. They just don't do that. You'll see 50 or 50 plus, but try and get a UPF rating of 50. I've noticed over the past couple of years, a lot of manufacturers now are discussing UV protection in their clothing. One website I've used to buy a lot of my summertime outdoor clothing is called Coolibar, and I'll put a link down below. All their stuff is UPF 50. I use it for running and just being outside in general. But you can find other UPF 50 articles of clothing on Amazon or at your favorite sporting goods store or department store. When we talk about clothing, we don't want to forget a hat. Again, look for a hat that will block 98% or UPF 50 rating. Get something with a brim to keep it off your face. I've yet to find a wider brim running hat that I like. They just don't make them for running. If they are wider brim, they're usually heavy and aren't really going to provide a lot of comfort when you're out in the hot sun. But get a baseball kind of cap, get UPF 50. Get something to at least keep the sun off your face, and I rely on the rest of my face, my ears, and my neck, protecting that through sunscreen. So now let's talk about sunscreens, which of course are SPF rating. I'm sure you're very familiar with that, but the SPF rating is really the additional protection you get from that sunscreen compared to not using sunscreen. In other words, an SPF of 30, for example, says it would take 30 times longer for you to get burnt than if you had no sunscreen. So again, higher is better, just like UPF. So the Skin Cancer Foundation kind of breaks into 2 categories, intermittent exposure and more longer-term continuous exposure. I interpret intermittent as I'm getting out of my car and walking into a store, walking from my house down to the mailbox, those kinds of brief exposures. And for that, they recommend at least an SPF of 15. I put on a daily moisturizing cream that's SPF 15. It gets me through most of my day. Now, if you're going to be out for longer periods of time, the Skin Cancer Foundation recommends SPF 30. Which means, again, if you were to go out and with no sunscreen burn in 10 minutes, it would take 30 times that, or 300 minutes before you would burn with SPF 30. So again, higher is better. The Skin Cancer Foundation, I said, recommends at least SPF 30. My dermatologist told me to use SPF 50, so I use SPF 50. Going much above SPF 50 doesn't really gain you a whole lot. You can use higher than SPF 50, but I wouldn't pay for it. In other words, if you got a tube here that's SPF 100, and this is SPF 50, but the SPF 100 costs you twice as much, I probably wouldn't pay for that because you don't get that much more protection out of 100 versus 50. It's just a small amount of extra UV protection you get. It's really probably not worth the money. So at least SPF 30, SPF 50 would be better. Now, you may or may not know this. I didn't until I started, researching researching and getting into using sunscreens, there's really two types of sunscreens, mineral and then non-mineral. Mineral sunscreens use zinc oxide and or titanium dioxide, which are white pigments in there, to actually block or reflect the UV rays off your body. Non-mineral, which use certain chemicals, absorb the UV rays. So even though you could have SPF 50 mineral and SPF 50 non-mineral, they both provide SPF 50, they just work differently. So the mineral reflects or blocks the UV rays, the non-mineral absorbs it, again protecting your skin. What's the best? Well, the Skin Cancer Foundation says whichever one you use. It doesn't really matter, they're both effective. My dermatologist said they preferred mineral because they felt it kind of lasted a little longer, stayed on a little better. So I use SPF 50 mineral sunscreen. Now the other thing to consider in sunscreening is something that's sweat resistant or moisture resistant. You don't want all your sunscreen running off your body when you're out running as you get sweaty. I use a brand called Think Sport. It's just one I happen to choose. I like it. It's very sweat resistant, moisture resistant, but they're out there. You know, just find a brand you like. Make sure it'll stay on you when you get sweaty, or if you get wet, if you go swimming, if you use it, you know, at the beach or the pool or something. So get that sunscreen on your body. Now, the second aspect on your body are your lips. Your lips can get burnt, dry, and chapped in the sun, and there are SPF lip balms out there. Typically, you'll find those in the sunscreen section if you go to your Walmart or your department store and go where they have the sunscreens. There'll usually be a display there with some kind of lip balm, that SPF 45, SPF 50, whatever they might have. Consider using that also. Now, last thing I want to talk about are your eyes. I didn't know this until I had melanomas. You can get melanoma in your eyes. So when I go to my optometrist, my ophthalmologist, I make sure they check my eyes for that. And that's pretty rare. It's not real common. But you do want to protect your eyes from UV rays for macular degeneration. I think it can aggravate macular degeneration. So it's important to wear something over your eyes that blocks UVA and UVB rays. A lot of sunglasses do that, make sure they're blocking that full spectrum. I use running glasses. I got some clear running glasses that block UVA and UVB rays. Typically, the UV protection comes from the lens material, not from the tint. So just because you got a darker tint glass doesn't mean it's providing you more UV protection. It's in the lens material itself, how it absorbs or blocks those rays. So think about your eyes, think about your lips, your skin, and protect them this summer. I want you to have a safe summer. Don't want you getting that skin cancer. One recommendation, if you're an older runner and never been to a dermatologist, you might think about going and getting a check, checking all those spots, all those things on your face. Especially your face is very vulnerable because it obviously over your lifetime that's been most exposed to the sun. So think about doing that, but irregardless, wear SPF 50 sunscreen, at least SPF 30, preferably SPF 50. Get UPF 50 clothes on your body, protect your head, protect your lips, and protect your eyes, and have a safe running summer. So thank you. I appreciate you being here today and watching this video. If you liked it, please scroll down and hit that like icon if you're new here. I'd love to have you subscribe and stick around. Please hit that subscribe icon. Thanks again and happy running.